welcome to another edition of the Bullheaded Podcast. I'm your host, per usual, here with Jess P-Bush. Shout out to Zoo.
Yeah,
He's in Japan, living it up. But how you doing, P-Bush?
I'm doing all right, man. Actually, had my first fantasy draft last night, so
Ah,
full point PPR. I haven't done a full point PPR in a long time. It's usually the half point scheme. So had the third pick, and McCaffrey fell to me. Somebody took
mm,
Eckler second. Obviously, we know who was going first, and the Jet himself. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, McCaffrey fell, and was able to pick up ATN and Brees Hall as well, and rounded out with Higgins and Amari Cooper as my two wideouts with
Mm,
your boy Swifty, one of my bench guys, man. So I don't know.
yes.
I'm pretty excited. I got T Law as my quarterback, and got
Yeah.
my and I guess we'll talk. I'll talk about him shortly. But the tight end that I wanted, I feel like there could be some values
Mm.
this year at that position. So
Was
it's
it a 8-man
fun to
or
get. It's
10-man?
actually a 12 man. So
Ah,
bit
stepping it
thinner,
up.
bit thinner than I'm used to. I know, the league Zoo and I always talk about, that's a 10 man. We've had that for
Mm,
God, pushing 8-9 years now. So I'm usually more comfortable with that. But man, once you get into a 12 man, you're kind of like, damn, does my team suck? And then you're like,
yeah.
nah, no, it's just a little thinner. It takes a little while to get, into that third, fourth round turns and expect to get great players. So I don't
Mm,
know. Um,
yeah.
We're all just guessing here.
Facts. Yeah. When it comes to fantasy, I've kind of, when I first started out, was living in the 14 team. That's the one I've been in the
Mm,
longest.
yep.
I was in a 12-man a couple of years ago, but this year I'm in my first 8-man. So I
Ooh.
feel like I've done a couple of mock drafts, and I don't know. To me, I feel like I draft just how my teams have been coming out. I've been drafting really well. Now, I know it's a sliding scale. I have like expert, pro, beginner, whatever. I've tried to
Hmm.
go into a lot more expert mocks because I've never been, like I said, adjusted to an 8-man draft. But I've liked how my 8-man drafts have come out so far. So I
What's
definitely
harder
have
about those, Sean, is
yeah,
you get two stacked almost, and then you're making decisions on who to flex every week.
start, yeah,
And you're
yeah,
like, dude, why is I don't know. I mean, let's just say J.K. Dobbins has a great year, right? But he's your
yeah,
fourth running back.
hmm
You're gonna have to. It's a big trading league. That's what I've found. The
yeah,
8-man leagues, it's all about the trades and value. But man, it's almost like just being two stacked. It's like building your
yeah,
own
for
Madden
sure.
team.
For sure. So trying to get adjusted to how I draft my 8-man league and my
You know,
14-man league. But uh a guy that we're going to be talking about, Travis Kelce, in this tight end segment is I mean, the consensus number one guy
yeah.
uh in everybody's box. So I want to get P-Bush's, thoughts, ideas of Kelce, maybe the other guys, some sleepers that he could be looking at in terms of the tight end group.
Yep. I mean, Kelsey, I don't think, enough said really right there. I mean, the fact that you have a tight end going like, sixth in most fantasy drafts, obviously you take into account a full PPR league. I've seen him going as high as five. And I think that has a lot to do with a bit of the running back concerns. I know we've talked about that in weeks past. Um, Wide receivers also being heavily valued this year. But like
Yeah.
I always echo this, man. If you draft Travis Kelce, it's pretty much like you're just getting another wide receiver. Now you might
Yeah.
not get the highest level at the actual wide receiver position, but it is a year that is deep at the wide receiver position, partially because there's some seriously good rookie wideouts that are available, like a Quentin Johnson, Zay Flowers. We talked about some of these guys. So
Mhm.
you can actually find more value at wide receiver. And I think a lot of people are looking at the tight end position this year and are like, well, Kittle's kind of getting up there. Mark Andrews had a quote off year last year. You look at guys like Darren Waller, right? Kyle Pitts. Some of these guys are just in new situations, or we're just kind of waiting for them to kind of prove their point to rival a guy like Kelsey. Maybe not in the first round, but at least being considered, okay, I might take a tight end in the third round, like we've seen with Gronkowski in years past, Tony Gonzalez way back. The tight end position, I think, ebbs and flows the most. But when there's a guy, they're usually around to stay for a while. And we've seen that with a handful of these dudes. So, um, Kelsey, not much more to add there. He's obviously going to be the first one off the board. I think Kittle and Mark Andrews are kind of the next two off the block there.
Yeah.
I will say Kittle for me. I'm not going to say he's a decline, but I just think he's so valuable to the Niners in the passing or in the run blocking attack. He's one of the
Yeah.
most true dual threat tight ends that most people consider to be the most valuable aspect that they can add. Right? You can catch the ball as much as you want, but if you can't block, you might have some issues getting playing time, especially as a young, unproven guy. And one guy that's, I guess, considered on the younger side that I'm eyeing as an uptick this year is Pat Fryermuth. So that's actually
Mm,
the tight
that's a
end that
good
I
one.
ended up taking last night.
Yeah.
He ended up falling to me, and I was praying because I hesitated in like the ninth round or something like that. I was like, maybe he'll be there in the 10th. And as it was getting closer, there were a couple auto picks. I'm like, I swear to God, if one of y'all takes it on an auto pick. But they came back online and made a different pick,
Mhm.
obviously. But this is a guy that I think young tight ends benefit from playing with a young quarterback, and I've personally gotten to see this with Cole Kmet in Chicago.
Yeah.
He's a homegrown guy from Chicago. I'm not saying he's a top 10 tight end at this point, but he gets a lot of attention from his quarterback in Fields because they're kind of seen as a pacifier. It's one of the best descriptions I've
Yeah.
ever seen for a tight end. I think Tony Romo might have been the first one to use it. It's just a guy that he's 9 times out of 10, he's going to be open, right? Unless it's Travis Kelce, then you're going to be double teaming him. But these
Yeah.
guys are ones that are red zone monsters, right? You're always worried about the fade from the wideout or the little check down to the running back. Fryermuth only had 2 touchdowns last year. He did catch over 60 balls and I think just under 750 yards. And that's with all their quarterback turmoil that they had last year with my previous favorite quarterback in the league, Mitchell Trubisky. That's a running joke for all you out there. Um,
Yeah.
but now they got Kenny Two Gloves, man. And I think he very much likes using his tight ends, right? I think it's once again,
Mhm.
it's just kind of a safety blanket for him. The only thing that I guess you have to consider when taking Fryermuth, is the fact that they do have Deontay Johnson and they do have George Pickens. So you're talking about
Yeah.
target rate, that could be an issue. But when I'm looking at a red zone opportunities, I think this guy can eat. And he is a pretty good pass blocker. He's also a pretty good run blocker. And I just think that at this point in Kenny Pickett's career, he needs to just kind of keep the ball moving, right? He doesn't need to go for the big shots all the time. We know he's athletic. And I just think Fryermuth, for where he's going in drafts, you could potentially get a top 8 tight end in like the ninth or 10th round. And if you're willing to sit back and take a risk and see if he's still available at that point, you're able to fill up your roster in the eighth and ninth rounds with solid backup wide receivers and running backs to really solidify that end and still not have to worry too much about the tight end position. So that's a guy I'm looking at. And
Mm.
similarly, but more veteran, is Darren Waller. I think I'm very interested to see how he fits into this Giants scheme. Um, I think Daniel Jones is a very similar quarterback to Kenny Pickett, in the fact that you and I both know that they're very athletic. They both can run the
Yeah.
ball if they want to, but they need kind of a consistent guy that they can throw the ball to, especially in the red zone, where sometimes these guys may struggle a bit. And I do think that Darren Waller going to New York also opens up the field for guys like Isaiah Hodgins, obviously Saquon Barkley, we know. But if you have to respect a legitimate one or two guys on the outside or in the slot position coming from, or the tight end spot, it's only going to help your team entirely. And the Giants aren't a joke, man. Like we always
Mhm.
joked about them as a cute story last year. They took down a very talented Vikings team last year in the playoffs.
Sure did.
They have a stellar defense that's kind of always been their staple. And if they can really get Daniel Jones locked in this year, who knows what they can do? I mean, the NFC East is one of the most tightly packed divisions. Maybe not up there with the AFC East because of the Commanders. I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
I'd say the worst team in the NFC East is worse than the worst team in the AFC East, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of the
Yeah.
Patriots and Commanders. But yeah, man, I think Darren Waller, he's 30 years old, but at the tight end position, you're not taking as much wear and tear, especially if you have a good offensive line that doesn't need to necessarily have him blocking as a sixth guy,
Yeah.
right? So I do think I'm just kind of looking at guys that, quarterbacks that need a security blanket or a pacifier. And these are two of the most prime tight end options, in my opinion, um, that are available. Now, Waller's going a lot earlier than
For
Fryermuth
sure.
is,
He's in the
but you
top
can
five,
still,
probably six
yeah, it's
tight end.
5'6". He's kind of around the Goddard area.
Yeah.
Um, who's obviously another guy. You can kind of go on. There's a lot of mid-level tight ends that you never know could just end up having a great year. So yeah, those are kind of the two guys I've been eyeing. Unfortunately, haven't been able to get Waller, just because I feel like at the time I wasn't willing to spend the capital, when he was clearly going to be coming up in the next couple picks. So, but
Mhm.
Fryermuth, if you're looking for a solid value that could turn into a nice little upside, he's the one I'm eyeing right now.
Uh, Yeah, I agree with Farmouth. I think, the tight end is usually always the quarterback's best friend. So with a young
Hmm.
quarterback, I know everyone wants to explode with Deontay Johnson and, George Pickens, which for good reason, because Deontay for a good while has been consistent in fantasy. Last year he was kind of up and down. And then George Pickens is starting to build this momentum. So I understand that you would probably just want to go to those guys if you see them on the board. But Move has the potential, especially in the red zone, to be maybe a jump ball type of guy that can just get easy touchdowns.
Yep.
For me, and I kind of came onto this revelation last year. I actually think I got him off the waiver wire, and that was just because I was in the deep, deep parts of fantasy football. And we were joking about this, I think, a couple pods ago. Like, shout out to Matt Berry. I watch his fantasy stuff sometimes, but usually the guys that have the gyms are some guy in a
It
basement
was
in Minnesota that has
grimy.
like
Yeah.
10,000 views, and he's just talking about, look, this is the guy you should pick up on a waiver wire. And at this
Yep.
time, um, I can't remember who I had as my tight end, but I think he had like a day to day thing, and he played on a Thursday night. So I was like, let me just pick up this guy from Tennessee. I think it's like Chig
Uh,
Okongwu.
Aquanku, yeah.
And yeah, I want to say last year he was kind of like a tight end two, splitting duties with I think Hopper, or whoever was
Austin
there as tight
Hooper,
end
yep.
one.
Yep.
Yeah, he was there, and he was kind of coming on late, and he was splitting time with the first tight end. But now he's the starter, and part of the reason why I think he's as low as he is, I think one list I saw on CBS, he's like 16 or 17, is because of the quarterback situation. Like, I don't know if they're looking at Tannehill as being maybe over the hill. Maybe he is not, or he's maxed out to what he could be right now. But
Yeah.
he moves like a receiver. He's super athletic. He got open.
Hmm.
And I know the hype is with DeAndre Hopkins, and for good reason. He's going to come in as number one receiver. Um, you know, do I think he's past his prime? Maybe not, but I don't think he's the go-to guy that he used to be. So for me, I looked at Traylon Burks being a guy who's going to come back, but he was injured. Uh, who else is he going to throw to? And
Yeah.
to me, the raw traits that he showed last year, just able to get open and move around the middle of the field, I was like, this is a guy that you can end up maybe getting him super, super late. I mean,
Yep.
I don't think he goes undrafted,
He
but
went
I think you can get
15th
him.
round last night in my
Yeah.
draft. Backup tight end,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I think, depending on what you prioritize,
Right.
I think he could be a really good option as let's just throw him in there if you want to be safe and get maybe like a Fryer Muth or whatever earlier and have like a legit, he's going to start and get targets. You can just put him there, but putting this guy on the backup, at the end of the
Yeah.
roster, that could be a nice option for when maybe it's week 4 or 5 and now you're switching this guy out for Fryer Muth because this guy's just getting a bunch of volume and targets. So I think he's a good
Absolutely.
option. Um, Guy that I'm not as high on, I think I wrote him down. Might have put him on my other list. Is the guy from where is he at? I want to say. I mean, Pitts is an easy not easy option.
I had that in mind too,
But
and I did want to ask you about him. I was like,
I,
it's just kind of a prove it year for me, like the third year, right?
mm,
Ritter, it's not like their coaching changed. He's clearly a run first coach, and they just got Bijan. So I'm sitting there
yeah,
like, you're sharing. I did get Drake London. He's one of my, I think he's my third or fourth wide receiver. People keep talking about both London and Pitts kind of breakout year, right? Working with Ritter, having a full year
yeah.
under
Which
his
one
belt
though?
this year. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Like they're not going to be scorching through a bunch of
mm-mm.
defenses just putting up 30 a game, right? And then you got to take into account Bijan's share of the run game and his pass catching ability. So I agree with you. I think Pitts is kind of like the opposite of Kelsey. He's kind of like not the ultimate fade, but he's a guy that I think is still a little overvalued just because of the hype around him.
And I'd want to be fair because I don't. This is not a talent thing. I think it's more so
Mm-mm.
of last year the quarterback situation and this year the quarterback situation not being the greatest. So you
And
kind of
usage.
don't know
They don't use him
who.
right.
Yeah, you kind of don't know who Ritter's going to end up keying in on because, like you
True.
said, Drake London's supposedly supposed to have a breakout, and you're looking at Kyle Pitts. I just don't think Ritter is as talented enough to have both of them break out. Because then,
Mm.
if both of them let like this coming year break out, that means the Falcons are going to pass, all kind of expectations. Because then that means you're looking at guys who are true game breakers, and then you put on top of that Bijan in the backfield. Yeah, the Falcons could be, maybe first or second in the NFC South. So
Oh, for sure. And
I
that's a
kind
wide
of thought
open
that was an
division. We
easy
talked
one.
about that.
Yeah. But the uh, I had it written down, but I didn't have it. But I guess I'll just go with Pitts. Like I said, with most tight ends, it's more so of a Travis Kelce and then everyone else.
Yeah.
But I do want to see Mark Andrews because allegedly this new offense is going to be more pass happy. And I
Mm.
do kind of want to see how the pecking order goes because I know there's hype with Zay Flowers. I know there's hype with Odell Beckham. But even when, they had Greg Roman and it was kind of a run first offense, Mark Andrews was still Lamar's number one go-to guy when he needed a touchdown, when he needed a big third down conversion. He was his guy. Now, most
Mm-hmm.
people will say because they didn't have any options on the outside, which is true, but I still think that Odell is a good receiver. I don't know if he's going to return to like all
Probably
pro,
not.
all conference type of number one. I think he'll be a nice piece, and I think he'll be with Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, and Rashad Bateman, another guy we forgot about. Like, I
Mm.
think they'll all be a nice collection, but I still kind of think the number one option could be Mark Andrews, even in this offense. And I'm not saying he's Travis Kelce, but I think he has the ability to flex out and move around and showcase more of his route running skills. So
Mm-hmm.
he's a guy that, if this offense is truly going to go into a pass happy type of offense, I could kind of see that maybe getting close to Kelsey. It's not going to be Kelsey, 1A,
It's
1B,
because of the
but I think he
targets.
could get close.
It's just the
Yeah.
targets, And
Yeah.
to your point earlier, just talking about Odell, like I don't want to put him in this category because I'd maybe say like this guy 2 years ago could be what Odell adds, and that's like an Adam Thielen type role, right? Where
Hmm.
he's a great number two, right? He's a great complimentary wide receiver. When you put him in a number one, like now he pretty much is, and I think Carolina, right? He's with
Yeah.
the Panthers
He's with
now.
Carolina.
He's not the greatest number one to have, but you got to remember this guy has put up double digit touchdowns multiple times. He's a red zone monster. And I think that type of contribution is what they're hoping Odell gives and also just opens up the field. And honestly, mentors Zay Flowers. That's also just a huge aspect is he can just kind of mentor him and kind of
Yeah.
guide him through his, 9 years in the league at this point. I think the one-handed catch was like 2014, which blows my mind. But yeah,
I do want to add one guy that 9 times out of 10, if I had to bet, you probably don't have to draft, depending on your league. Like if you're in a 14-team league, maybe. But Hayden Hurst is a guy
mm,
you should monitor in the suit. Like if you just want to take a flyer on your last pick or the waiver wire, pick him up because I ended up. This is just from personal experience. He was with Joe Burrow. Now people will say Joe Burrow is such a great quarterback. He's going to be able to get Hayden Hurst targets, but he was pretty consistent. He always give you around 8 to 9, 10 points, maybe 12 points on a good day if he scored a touchdown. But I just felt like for the tight end position, because it gets so scarce and we just don't know how it's going to go, he's a nice guy to just have in your lineup. And for
yep,
me, I feel like he's almost more so of a bridge guy. Like, say, for instance, you're in a draft and I'm giving away free game right now, but hey, it's a perk for watching the podcast. But say you're in a situation where you have Hayden Hurst. You're like, I'll just pick him up on the waiver wire. I take him with my last pick. And then maybe earlier you put Dalton Kincaid in your, I don't know, let's just say you drafted him like in the 8th, 9th, 10th round, whatever. And you're like, I don't know if I'm comfortable starting him. Just put Hayden Hurst in there. He's with
mm,
Carolina. Bryce Young is definitely going to need an option at tight end. I can see him getting some decent targets.
yeah.
And then if you see Kincaid maybe by week 4, week 5 explode, then you can just switch that out and maybe you can
Yeah,
just,
he's a good
keep Hayden
stream.
Hurst for a bye
What they
week.
call it like a streaming option, right?
Yeah.
Just like maybe your guys like for example, my strategy. I usually don't draft the backup tight end. I like to just kind
Hmm.
of like you said, Sean. First couple weeks you monitor. Like my last pick in the draft was Jamison Williams. I'm holding that motherfucker. I swear to
Yeah.
God, because we don't know what he's going to be doing in six
He may
games
hit,
after
boy.
after 6 games.
Lottery.
He could hit, and that's something that you just kind of try and project down the road for development purposes. To your point, handling a Dalton Kincaid, same thing. Give him a couple weeks to just get his legs underneath him in this incredibly tough NFL, right? Which is just one of the most brutal sports to break into.
Yeah.
Even though there are so many roster spots, I don't think we give them enough credit that you have to earn that starting spot and then you got to hold it. And
Yep.
for a rookie to do that on a prolific offense, that's not an easy ask. So,
Dawson Knox may have something to say about that.
yeah, he will. But, I think also at the same time,
Yeah.
if you could have two great tight ends, man, we've seen plenty of teams.
Hmm.
Patriots are probably the obvious one. run a 2 tight end set and have unbelievable success, right? Just kind of
Yeah.
trading off on who's blocking, who's receiving, or hell, even running both of them on routes. So I think he's the quiet rookie, right? That people are, if you're into it and you love fantasy football, you obviously know his name.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, I
Yes.
do think like a Hayden Hurst, even a Okonkwo, right? I think he's another great option because he does have that 1 year under his belt where I do think he'll actually get a decent amount of targets. If if it's Tannehill, I'm a bit more content starting him. If it's
Yeah.
Malik Willis, I'm gonna be like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anybody else? Yeah, I'm good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that it's hard to really trace these guys, and I think there's
Mm.
really two that stuck out to me that I'm just avoiding completely this year, and I think they're rather self-explanatory just because of their offenses. But one of them is Zach Ertz in down in Arizona.
Oh yeah, that's a
You
bad
know,
one.
just a horrible situation with obviously even with Kyler Murray. Look, I had him last year. He was a pretty viable tight end in the first half of the season. Like he was getting a lot of targets. He was getting like 6, 7 catches a game, 80 yards. Like in a half point PPR, if I can get 12 points out of my tight end that is not considered to be a top 3 draft option, I'll
Yeah.
take that any day of the week because you know you have better value at the other positions. But man, this year he's not, and not only that, he's getting older, right? It is a position. I know I mentioned earlier with Waller being 30, but the way Zach Ertz played, he was very physical, a lot of route running in his career. He's got a bit of wear and tear. Um, so he's kind of one guy that I'm fading, and another one that's, in my opinion, maybe not an exact similar situation, but just kind of a fading team in general, and that's Tyler Higbee on the Rams. Um, you know, we can rave all about Cooper Cup. Cooper Cup's going to get his, right? Yeah, of
Hmm.
course. Cam Akers rising in a lot of people's draft stocks. But you look
I
at
don't
this
understand
offense.
that one.
I mean, he's getting the lion's share of carries, and with running
Uh,
backs, it's all about volume because you're bound to
yeah.
break one at some point. So I understand that, but you're putting Higby really in like the third receiving option role, right? Target wise. And he has had big seasons with Stafford, but Stafford's only getting older. He's only had more injuries on his resume. And I just think that this might be the year that we really see, even though they didn't play well last year, this team really kind of fall apart. And on the offensive side, at least, we know the talent they have on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Um, and they're just in a tough division. So, I think there's a lot of tight ends that you could quote unquote fade, Pitts being one of them that we already mentioned. But Higby's just a guy that I think a lot of people aren't overvaluing him in drafts. But if you have a choice between Higby or Okonkwo, I'm probably taking the younger guy with the upside, even though he might have a little uncertainty at quarterback. I don't think you can argue that the Rams don't have uncertainty at quarterback just because of the risk
Mm.
potential. So those are kind of two guys that I think have had a decent amount of hype the past couple years, especially Higby. Man, he went on a touchdown tear
He
the
did.
past couple of years, and you're just
Remember.
I'm a quote Zoo, even though he's not here, man. He's bound to regress back to the mean, and you could talk about that with a lot of guys, and there are going to be some ones that defy that and can keep it going. I just don't have faith in those two guys, so I would probably try and avoid them. Maybe go with the younger option, maybe even the Kincaid, like you were saying.
Yeah. Well, another point on Kincaid, I've been seeing a lot of reports of they're early on before like maybe he gets his blocking down that they're going to try to use him as a receiver, and that just makes like his value even more enticing because then it's like
Yep.
if you're telling me they're going to use him as a receiver or in receiver like sets,
Yep.
and then we kind of saw how Gabe Davis didn't really take the number 2 option over last year. If you're telling me that Kincaid ends up being the number 2 option for Josh Allen behind Diggs, like that could be, that's not a league winner, but that can put you in a really good spot to get into the playoffs. But
Hmm.
I kind of wanted to ask you this question with because we talk about Kelsey all the time, and uh, he's basically tight end one, but because of his production and just how he's just more of a plug and play, and you just know you're going to get a set amount of points from him every year, kind of made me wonder because I was looking at the rankings, and this is more so of a who would you rather draft, and they're both respectively on ESPN 8 and 9 in their, I guess, rankings.
Hmm.
Uh, and let's just say you're in the middle of the draft, like maybe a 10 team or whatever, and it's kind of the dreaded because nobody ever likes to be in the middle when you're like in
Hmm.
any number draft. But let's just say you're in the 10 team, 12 team, whatever, you're in the middle of the rounds, and all the stud backs have gotten taken off or taken off the board, and then maybe there's a receiver that gets the number one receiver gets taken, whatever, Justin Jefferson. Um, who would you rather have, Diggs or Kelsey, if they're both sitting there?
Probably taking Kelce. I
See,
mean,
I would
and
too. But Diggs, if you look at his track record with fantasy, he's put up some crazy
he's
numbers,
I mean
bro.
he's quietly just I think he gets lost in the shuffle
He's
just
good
because of
every year.
yeah, he's great every year, and I think he's probably consistent. But what I'm actually curious to see this year is, I know that the Bills are extremely pass heavy,
Mm,
and we've seen James Cook kind of move up in draft boards, right? Are they going to be running the ball a little bit more? I don't think that takes away from Diggs, you know, value attractiveness, right? I think he's still an
yeah,
unbelievable pick. If you can get him on the, if you have a late first round pick and you can get him on the turn somehow after drafting maybe like Nick Chubb at 9 or 10, and then you flip around and get Diggs at 13. My God, hammer that any day of the week. But for me, man, it's just all about targets, and you can show me the extremely crowded, but rather, in my opinion, middling Kansas City wide receiver group. Sky Moore, MVS. Obviously Kadarius Toney's up there too. They drafted
Justin
Rasheed
Ross
Rice,
now apparently.
Justin Ross, Rasheed Rice as well. Um, you know, you're still going to always come back to, oh, but they still have Travis Kelce.
Mm,
So it's like I've had him on my dynasty team for 2 years, man. He's the sole reason, due to injuries of my entire running back room, that I managed 500 records in
oh,
those leagues, because you're looking at least 12 to 13 targets a game. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, if
and
he's
probably a
catching
touchdown
and probably a touchdown. If he's catching
at
9 balls
least.
a game, you got to know that Travis Kelce is not. He's not always catching dink and dunk passes. It's usually that 10 to 15 yard marker, his little curl route that he loves to do, and then he sidesteps over the linebacker, right?
Hmm.
And then he's wide open. And not only that, his yards after catch is just huge. Now Diggs obviously has the big playability. He might get you a 75-yard touchdown that you usually won't see from Travis Kelce, but you can't bet on that every single week. Now, do I think Travis Kelsey's going a little early? Probably, but that's just because of precedence in my mind of where you should take a tight end. Like a couple of years ago, you were able to get Travis Kelsey in like the second, maybe even early third round in a 10-team league.
Yeah,
That was unbelievable, right? And now you're really seeing, okay, now he's probably valued where he should be, but it's just kind of getting over that mental hump. Okay, I'm actually going to be taking a tight end with my first pick in this draft, and I think that's
yeah.
that's a quarrel that a lot of people are dealing with right now. Um, but like I said, I think there's more depth at the wide receiver position, so you can take Kelsey and still get two solid wide receivers probably by round 5. If you go tight end, running back, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, I think you'll fill out that roster pretty well, and then have a decent quarterback option in the 6th, 7th round. So
Because
I'm
I'm
leaning
looking.
I'm leaning Kelsey there.
Yeah, and I brought that up because they were 8 and 9 respectively in ESPN. I think Diggs was 8 and Kelsey was 9. But now that
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at like running backs, it's like once you get, I think, past McCaffrey, Eckler, and Robinson, like Barkley,
Chubb,
Pollard, I'd still, yeah, Chubb's 7 on this list. But like to me, like, and I think Zoo maybe was on this whole train of like Derrick Henry not being who he might or who he normally is. He may
mm-hmm.
be trending a little bit not crazy down, but it's just like that type of production is just that's just crazy for a running back. So
Yeah,
like if I had a choice between him and Derrick Henry, like I would probably take him, just like you said, solely off the targets, uh, the red zone touchdowns, and another thing too that Kansas City does because of Andy Reid, they kind of do quirky stuff at the goal line, and it
yep.
usually involves Kelsey.
Little
So say
shovel
he's like a,
pass.
yeah, he's like it's like a shovel pass, or maybe he's the quarterback and he just does like running back or RB power or whatever. Like he's usually involved in any type of weird stuff
Yeah,
that goes on at the goal line. So then
absolutely.
that's gonna kind of boost his value just in terms of being someone who's gonna get maybe just an easy touchdown. Um, but thinking about Diggs, he does get a lot of targets, and it's like I just said a couple minutes ago about Kincaid maybe being looked at as a receiver. To me, that kind of screams like, okay, maybe we think he could be a number 2 option if he hits. So if that's the case, and you're relying on a rookie to be your number 2 option, that means Diggs is going to get a lot of
Yeah,
action. So I don't know.
that's
It's
true.
like you said, the best scenario would be like if you could maybe draft Kelce in that middle round, and then you're dealing with amateurs, and then you can get Diggs on that turn,
Yeah, maybe.
then
Fingers
that would be
crossed.
perfect. That would be perfect. So
Yeah. The
I
only
just
the
thought that'd
only
be
other thing,
something
Sean,
interesting.
that's a good because it's a good question. But the other thing I always consider with Diggs, and honestly, even with Josh Allen a little bit, is when you get into the playoffs for fantasy purposes,
Mhm.
you're dealing with some bad weather up in Buffalo, and sometimes
Yeah,
it's really
that's a good
hard for
point.
the volume in the air, especially a big play ball. I think that's not saying it's why, but I think Gabe Davis usually ends up struggling, quote unquote, partially because they just can't get the deep ball because the wind's taking it every which way, or you don't want to leave it hanging up too much. So that's always something I just consider with Buffalo, which is why I'm the biggest proponent that they just need to start learning how to run the damn ball.
Yeah,
Like I think they just really have to start utilizing it and building it early in the season so that it's ready and at its full potential at the end. So just always something to consider with just the Buffalo Bills passing
yeah.
game in general. But that's not a knock on them.
Well, speaking of the running game,
Mm,
there's been a couple of backs who have made moves. Dalvin Cook took his time. I
yeah,
think early on, a lot of people thought he was just going to go to Miami because he's naturally from that area. And, I think him being put with Mike McDaniel and just that whole staff of, or not staff, but stable of running backs and the receiving corps, Miami could have been looking like a really, really uh, strong playoff contender. But, he ended up going with Jets, Jets, Jets,
that's
Jets, and Aaron
that.
Rodgers. So I
Yeah.
thought that was a pretty cool move. And, now Jonathan Taylor, who has been hinting at being not in the best of moods when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts. And I don't ever want to say a guy's not injured, but a couple back strains, a couple things that's been going on with him.
Little James Harden
Uh,
in them.
yeah, doing a little bit of gamesmanship with the Colts. So now the Colts are just like, go out there, test your market, see what you can get. So I wanted to ask P. Bush, what do you think some of his, I guess, best landing spots are? What are some teams that
Yeah.
should maybe, move some of their draft capital to go get Jonathan Taylor?
Well, Sean, let me just put it to you this way, man. There's two teams. Well, they obviously Vegas has their odds, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
got to
yeah,
be able to
for
place a
sure.
bet on something like this. They're going to take your money any way that they can. The two top teams right now, odds wise, are the Dolphins, number one, which has been the one that has been swirling through the
Yeah.
media probably the most. And to your point about Dalvin Cook joining that, damn, dude, if Jonathan Taylor joins that, holy shit, man, that offense is electric. The second team, though, that's odds, and I was actually surprised by this, is the Bears. And now I'm not saying
Mm,
that they would do it because I do think the similarity between those two teams is, to your point earlier, the jumbled backfields, right? We have, Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert, and then Devon. I'm probably gonna butcher his last name.
Chain or
Is it
Chain,
Achane?
something like
Okay,
that.
Achane, yeah,
Yeah.
who's a great third down passing back from what I'm reading about. But still young. Clearly, he's not going to be a three down back. He's just not at that level yet. And then you look at the Bears, and you kind of got a very similar situation with Herbert, Deontay Foreman, and then the rookie Roshan Johnson. You're looking at teams that are kind of like, well, we need like a stud number one running back that we can really rely on. His chances of being successful as a team pushes me towards the Dolphins. But
Yeah.
if he wants to be in an elite rushing attack, I mean, joining the Bears would not be a bad decision. Now, obviously, this isn't his decision. They have to trade for him, right? And I think from what the
So
Colts
who
are
you
asking,
want to give up, P. Bush?
well, no. Here's what they're asking for: a first rounder. The Colts are looking for a first rounder or a package of draft picks that would equate to be about a first, maybe a second and a third, or something
Mm,
like that. And that's the one thing the Bears have a copious amount of, man, is draft picks. We saw them. I think they robbed the Panthers. I think we've all
yeah, that
come to
was a
that
tough trade for
conclusion.
Carolina.
Um, you can understand the situation when you really need a quarterback, right? And it's honestly the best possible situation to be in when you have the number one pick and you don't need to take a quarterback. And that's what the Bears found themselves in. So I do think if he wants to immediately have an impact, going to the Bears would probably be a great option. And I'm not just saying that as a hometown fan. I just know we know what they did. They were the best rushing team in the league last year by a mile. I mean, Justin Fields missed 2 games and he still rushed for nearly 1,200 yards. I think he could have been actually, I think he was seventh or eighth in the league in rushing. He probably could have easily been fifth, maybe even fourth, had he
Yeah.
played the entire season, which is just ridiculous to think about. Um, and that's not a knock on Herbert and Deontay Foreman. I think they're both very formidable backs. We've seen both of them have pretty excellent gameplay when they get a full start. Um, And you could argue the same thing about the Dolphins. I just think they're very indecisive on who's going to be getting the lion's share. It's going to be a near 50-50 split. Now, Mostert has more injury issues. They're both coming from the same Niners system. It's kind of being the backup to whoever the stud was at the given time. Um, but I think both of these teams are really looking for just their go-to guy that they can give the ball. And I do think he'll probably, if the trade is pulled off, I think the Dolphins would be more willing to go all in on him. But the Bears
Mhm.
probably have more access to the draft capital that the Colts would want, especially because they hold the Panthers pick, if you remember, right? So even if you were to trade that pick for Jonathan Taylor, I think you might even be able to get like a third, fourth rounder as well as Jonathan Taylor, just because of where the Panthers are expected to be next year in the draft. Um, I do think the Dolphins are probably the best fit for him, but at the same time, that's a very pass heavy offense. So I mean, I don't know. I know you've been doing mock draft, Sean, but he
Mhm.
plummeted in our draft last night. Jonathan Taylor, a guy ended up being on auto draft, and he unfortunately got Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor as his auto draft picks because people were just fading guys that are kind of in that quarrelsome situation
Limbo.
with their
Yeah.
organization. Exactly. Um, so yeah, so I mean, does that affect his fantasy? I think if you're drafting him for fantasy purposes, the Bears are probably more ideal just because they're going to run the ball more than the Miami Dolphins might. But at the same time,
Mhm.
you got to mesh into whatever system you join. And at this late in the game, we have some historical context about running backs holding out and how it ended up turning out for them. Cough, cough, Le'Veon Bell. So, there they make it sound easy to just dive into a new team, and if you're that talented, you're gonna slide in and do exactly what you were doing 2 years ago in Indy. It's gonna take a little bit of time. So if he wants to trade, he better do it like now, so that he can at
Mhm.
least have like a week to learn the system. Even though it's not like you're a quarterback, but still, it's just a lot to learn, a lot to get straight before you're thrown into being the bell cow back
Mhm.
for any given team that's willing to trade for you. So I think those are the two options. He'll probably go Miami if I were to bet, but I do think it really depends on what he wants and also what the teams are willing to offer for
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. The first team I thought of, and this is your NFC North foe, was the Vikings.
him.
And
Yeah,
this was just
I think
because,
they're fourth in odds.
um, and that was just because of Madison. For all we know, he's going to be the starter.
Yep.
Uh, he's going to be the bell cow. Now, when he came into the league, he had Dalvin Cook in front of him, and I don't know. We don't know if that was just because of. I mean, we do know Dalvin Cook was a better back, so we do know that Madison can work in a committee. Now, there's other backs that are on the market, of course, but Madison, compared to those other backs that are probably free agents right now, it's like, we're good with Madison. We can make him, he'll be a 20 carry guy, whatever.
Hmm.
But then if Jonathan Taylor comes on the market and Madison, now I don't know if he's in this mode of like, he would be upset, which he probably would be because it's just like, I'm now the star of the show.
Finally
And now I
got
got
my
to share
shot.
the rock. I got to
Yeah.
share the rock with Jonathan Taylor. But we do know that he's been successful in that role as being the number two. So if you get a talent like Jonathan Taylor, along with Justin Jefferson, you got Jordan Addison. Kirk Cousins is now flirting with having probably one of the best offenses in the league. And I think that could be a game changer just in that division because of, you know, not to say Dalvin Cook was bad last year, but I mean, he was declining slightly, but that's every running back. Like, welcome to
Sean, we were
every,
picking on Zoo every week just to make him
yeah,
trade him. I was trying to convince
yeah.
him to trade him to me every week.
It's like, I mean, that's just kind of what the nature of the position. And
Yeah.
it's not a shot at any of these guys, but after about your third or fourth year, you're out of there. So if you get a guy like Jonathan Taylor who can supplement and maybe he goes into a situation with the Vikings and he's just not carrying as much as he did in Indianapolis, and then
Hmm.
they're a true 1-2 punch. That could be something interesting. I just thought of this on the fly. Maybe I know the Saints got Jamal Williams, but maybe you want him down there. Maybe you're like, okay, Alvin Kamara, what you got 3 or 4 games you're suspended for.
Yep.
Let's bring Jonathan Taylor in here to help Derek Carr because as much as people would like to say he's a starter, which he is, I think Derek Carr would benefit from having a guy like Jonathan Taylor, and then when Alvin Kamara
He
comes
sure
back,
did when he had Josh
yeah,
Jacobs. That benefited
yeah,
him.
yeah. I think he could benefit from having just an elite
Yeah,
backfield because then you're telling me you got three big. I wouldn't say Jamal Williams is a big time back, but he's a good back. But two
very
big time backs, like yeah, that could definitely work in New Orleans. But I do think it needs to be a situation where he can. I mean, I don't know what his end game is. Maybe he's trying to get paid, like
I think
most of the
that's
running
what he's
backs.
trying to find, a long-term contract,
Yeah,
and that's where I'm
which
like, the Dolphins probably don't have the money for that. The Bears do, but
probably not.
at this point, do you want to do that? Like that's the thing, Sean. And I wanted to pose this to you because we're seeing all this stuff with contract disputes with running backs. What makes Jonathan Taylor think somebody's going to trade a first-round pick for him if they're not even willing to pay some of these backs? Like hell, what did Dalvin Cook get? He got like $5 million a year for 1 year. I'm
Yeah,
not saying
probably
that.
with taxes after taxes, it's like
Yeah,
five or
in New
four
York
million.
too. Yeah,
Yeah,
but um, you are now, granted, you are looking at a guy that's only 24. I think Dalvin might be pushing 28, maybe. I don't know
yeah,
his exact age, but definitely closer to 30 than Jonathan Taylor is. And we're
yeah.
seeing them disputes. Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, some of these guys. I think one Taylor, he needs to have a hell of a year wherever he does end up going. If he does report to camp for the Colts, he better pop off, because if he wants that second contract, which is so coveted by all running backs because of what you just said, kind of that 5-6 year max shelf life for even top 10 running backs. I mean, that's just a brutal, brutal way to earn a career. And, it is hard for me to grasp that, but at the same time, some team's going to end up jumping on it.
Yeah.
But it is definitely affecting his fantasy value for sure.
I'm gonna be honest. I probably will stay away from Jonathan Taylor. Like I
Same.
have a draft this Sunday, and then my other draft is gonna be more towards I think more towards the beginning of September.
Same.
So for me, it's kind of like if I'm a running back coming into the league now, one of my probably like I mean, I would make this my main trade. I would train every day. Let's say I'm a college running back and I'm a sophomore and I just had a great freshman year and I'm going into my
Mm-hmm.
sophomore year. I would make sure my hands are perfect because
Yeah.
I do feel like backs like Christian McCaffrey. Now, people will say, well, look at Austin Eckler. Fair. But
True.
guys who are at the top of their league, we kind of saw it with Le'Veon. Guys who, and Le'Veon was more so of that was more of a self-destruction kind of, he made his own path. Like I understood what he was trying to do, but he kind of went about it the wrong way.
Yep.
But I will say, if I'm just a back that's training to get to the NFL, I would make sure my hands are A1 on point, and I would gear myself towards being a like true halfback, but also a catching option.
Yep.
Because to me, at
Gotta have it.
least if I go into my fourth or fifth year and I have all those type of trades, I can go to the negotiating table and be like, look, you know, put it this way, I think Marshall Falk has a better chance at in year 4 or 5 at the renegotiating table, if I can say that word, versus someone like Jonathan Taylor, who is a great back. And I'm not trying to compare careers, but just in terms of styles, like
Yeah,
you know,
he's more along like the Adrian Peterson
mhm.
type. Like, just I'm gonna run downhill
He's
at
an
you.
anomaly because he was just
He was,
like,
but he was. They could use him in the pass catching game, right? But he was just so
yeah,
good between the tackles, and then also just being able to
yeah,
bounce outside and reverse, that I picture Adrian Peterson as just, he was a pure running back, right? Now he could
yeah.
obviously catch the ball, and we saw him do it. But and Jonathan Taylor can catch the ball. I mean, he's not like
It's just
great
not a
at it.
strong
I
suit.
think you could also argue that Dalvin Cook, for the early part of his career, was not a great pass catching running back.
Mm-mm.
But then, to your point, you look at guys like Eckler. We've seen clips of Bijan Robinson looking hella nice coming out of the backfield in the passing game. I'm sure the Ritter's gonna really love that. But to your point, and if you're looking at it from a fantasy perspective, actually, you know what? I got a better one. Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's probably a bit closer, because now this year he might actually get some passing game, and I think that's also why a lot of people are very high on him, is because Kareem Hunt's no longer there,
Yeah,
right? So like, who are you going to use? Jerome Ford, I think, out of Cincinnati, might be one of their backs that's vying for kind of that third down passing role. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think going forward, you have to be able to catch the ball. I mean, we've seen, but then you look at Saquon Barkley, and he's having contract dispute issues. Obviously he's handled it at this point with the franchise
yeah.
tag, but even then, man, it's that brutal right now in the current situation for running backs, which is a bit eye opening.
Or you could just become a receiver,
Yeah,
or a
Aaron
DB. Because
Jones.
to me, if I had a son who was in the caliber of being a D1 athlete or had the potential to be a NFL pro, and I just see the baseline of his athleticism,
Kicker.
and I'm like, would you want to be a running back and get hit all day and maybe make it to your fifth or sixth year, or would you rather be a DB, train at that, and last in the year and last in the NFL at least 10, 15 years, get
Yep.
at least 3 contracts?
Look at Patrick
Um,
Peterson. You know,
yeah. Patrick Peterson's a perfect example because he coming out of high school, he was a super athlete and he could have played on
punt
either side
returner,
of the
kick
ball.
returner.
He could
Jesus,
have did
dude.
it whatever he wanted to do, but he, stuck
Yep.
at corner and he was a legit all pro type corner. So
Yep.
yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, and we can get to a whole nother discussion about the NFL, CBA, and all that stuff, and how they kind of have the franchise tag and how they treat their running backs. But it's just the nature of the beast.
Yep.
So for fantasy purposes, pass catching backs is the players and the players that get drafted higher, and
Absolutely.
tight ends, which was the discussion today, is Travis Kelce and everybody else. So you
Mm-hmm.
guys make sure maybe look at this pod as I would say most people have done some of their drafts. I'm a little bit later in mine, but make sure you look at this pod and see if you can find some gems with the tight end room because there's a lot of them.
Yep.
While you're doing that, go visit bullheaded_pod and look at some of the videos I put up. Everything from NFL to college football. We're in the thick of it right now. Is week 0 or the pre college football Saturday weekend is week 0
Yep.
with I think the biggest game being Notre Dame and Navy over in Ireland.
Oh
So
yeah.
if you're a diehard, you can go ahead and watch that one on NBC. But college football is ramping up. NFL is ramping up. Like I said, we're in fantasy draft season. So make sure you're on bullheaded_pod on Instagram. Make sure you're on TikTok, bullheaded864. Some of the same content, YouTube, Quantro knows. Make sure you listen to us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. And rate and review that as well. And for me, P. Bush and Zoo being in Japan, see you guys later.